Welcome to Herbally Yours, an adventure into the world of natural medicine. Here is your host, Dr. Ellen Kamai, the natural nurse who will help you take the leap to ultimate wellness.
Greetings, and thank you for joining me, Ellen Kamai, the natural nurse, for another edition of Herbally Yours, right here on the voice of Nassau Community College, 90.3 WHPC. Listen on air or online at iHeartRadio, Odyssey, TuneIn app, smart speakers, nccradio.org, and download our own app, the WHPC app. Also on iHeartRadio, etc. You can find us wherever you like to listen to your podcasts. Herbally Yours brings you the latest information about the many facets in the world of natural living. And today I am so happy and proud to bring on board Nicole Foss, Nurse Nicole, and she has over 11 years of experience in the cannabis industry, which is what we'll be focusing on today. But she has a range of expertise, including all aspects of extraction and research, and she is currently the product and brand director of Creva, which is an athletic recovery-focused hemp available wherever. And Nicole is the president-elect of the American Cannabis Nurses Association, of which I am also a member. Thank you so much for joining us today, Nicole.
Thank you so much for having me, Ellen. I'm so excited and grateful when I can share my knowledge and expertise with consumers and healthcare providers and have a real conversation about cannabis.
Well, let's go back in time. How did you come to the path of nursing?
So I came through nursing kind of actually through cannabis. So probably the opposite from most of my colleagues out there. I was working with veterans who were using cannabis for various reasons. And I was seeing firsthand that cannabis was helping them work through challenges such as chronic pain and PTSD symptoms, which led me down this rabbit hole of looking at research. I was a student at that time in biology, and, research was really something part of my degree that I was interested in. And I did this deep dive, and I just couldn't find the research really supporting what I was seeing. And from there, I got more ingrained into this veteran community that was working in the medical cannabis industry in Washington State. From there, the medical industry turned into the adult use recreational industry, where I was able to take this anecdotal evidence and all of these vets that I was working with. We went into a producer processor, which is a farm that actually grows THC cannabis. And we were able to bring some points of dirt therapy, camaraderie, but also just open, honest discussions about cannabis. And from there, I really knew that I had to understand the healthcare side of things. I enrolled into a master's in nursing program. And I just kind of really tried to merge my education and the experiences that I was having at this farm and working with these veterans. So a little bit backwards, but nonetheless, I'm here now as a nurse who is really looking at the research behind cannabis, but also understanding the anecdotal evidence that consumers are experiencing when they're using cannabis in many different aspects of life.
So what an interesting story. You were already working with veterans, and then you felt that it would sort of enhance your knowledge as well as your ability to work in the field and to be recognized as an expert by also becoming a nurse.
Absolutely. So a backwards path, but one that I am so grateful for.
So I don't know if it's backwards really, because I would say I did a similar thing. I was an herbalist first, starting in 1964. And then I became a nurse in 1973, also with that in mind, saying that, well, people are more likely to actually know that I'm serious about the information related to herbs if I also am a nurse. So, a similar path there. And it's really great because you can integrate all of that scientific knowledge and be in a place where you can share it with people. So that's wonderful. So a lot of people, it's I would say it's getting more and more confusing, maybe, rather than less and less confusing, because even in the American Cannabis Nurses Association, we're always talking about, definitions and their use and misuse. So we'd love to hear your clarity. Some of our listeners probably have heard terms like hemp, CBD, and THC, and Delta 8, and a lot of different terms that really are very confusing.
They are so confusing and they're ever evolving. So I like to start at just the very top of the pyramid to me, and that is defining hemp cannabis versus THC cannabis. And THC cannabis is sometimes referred to as marijuana in our legislative bills, or is also sometimes referred to adult use recreational cannabis. This is your THC cannabis. And that doesn't mean that hemp doesn't have THC. It just has very small amounts. And legally, there's been this threshold that is 0.03% THC or less as defining what hemp is versus a THC cannabis. So it's really that one molecule class of these intoxicating or psychoactive compounds called THC that really define the difference between these two different industries. So the hemp industry, which is mostly legal in all 50 states. There's a few states where it's rather gray. And then there's the THC world, which is, on ballots every year to become a legal market or a medical market in some of the 50 states. We have, back in 2015, Washington and Colorado really exploring the THC markets, opening it up for what's called adult use. But previously, there was this, medical arena that was available in lots of West Coast states. And that kind of included hemp and THC cannabis together. So it is really confusing as the industries evolve. We see these two kind of different defining places where cannabis is consumed. So I think it boils back to our main point that hemp is what's considered a non-psychoactive heavy cannabis variety versus that THC variety that again can be used in adult use and medical programs. And then not to make it cloudy or anything, but let's not make it cloudy. But you can just keep going and dialing it down into these different, what we call cannabinoids or those natural molecules. But I think the biggest thing consumers need to understand is that difference between hemp and THC.
And there is. Now, like you said, some states were very early to come into really a legalized space, even with THC, hemp, and for instance, Colorado, and I believe where you are. My son lives in Seattle.
Yeah, absolutely. In Washington, those kind of states did it in tandem. And then it was followed by Oregon and really kind of this West Coast vibe. And then, we have lots of other states and even the Midwest coming on board, which is exciting. But one of the biggest challenges is that it's not federally legal. Therefore, there's this hodgepodge, kind of a patchwork of different regulations around THC cannabis, which just makes it even more convoluted and confusing.
And also there are issues, I know, in terms of people purchasing it and the trail of that money.
Yeah, absolutely. There can be challenges when it comes to the banking system on the THC side. And again, that stems back to the overall regulations and the scheduling of THC cannabis, it's currently scheduled as number 1 category. And so by looking at this scheduling, it doesn't help the banking industry feel real comfortable, be it handling their money, right? It's a really hard gray area.
Well, I want to remind our listeners that you are listening to Herbally Yours right here on the voice of Nassau Community College, 90.3 WHPC. And of course, you can listen online. And today we are so happy to have as our guest, Nurse Nicole Foss. And if you're enjoying this show, these shows are available also on our archive. So if you feel your friends should listen, you can always tell them to listen. And you can always download the WHPC app as well for your listening pleasure. So thank you so much for that information. It's just gratifying to know that nurses are on board with true information, because there's a real challenge, I think, with overhyping and, commercial interests that aren't rooted like you are in science in terms of the information that people get.
100% agree. And research is what we should be using to fuel these industries and overall to help people. That's why a lot of us are here, especially these nurses within the cannabis and herbal spaces. We're looking for those alternatives, but ultimately we just want to help and we want everyone to have a better quality of life.
Now, I know also, for instance, in Colorado, like you pointed out, there was medical marijuana licensing first, which allowed you to use both CBD, which is widely available commercially, versus the THC containing hemp. So what's the difference between those two? Like, I'm sure people see even at the grocery store and everywhere now stuff that says CBD.
Yeah. So when we're talking about CBD, we're talking about that hemp industry. So the CBD products that we see on the market are loosely categorized by their THC content. Because if you remember that definition of hemp, you can still have 0.03% of THC on a dry weight basis, which makes it a little bit challenging when we're measuring it for like a topical or if we're using it in a tincture form. But overall, these CBD products don't have any more THC than that percent threshold. And if they contain THC, they're what's called a full spectrum product. So full spectrum has kind of all the good stuff from the hemp plant. It's got flavonoids and terpenes, which are just more active compounds that may play a role with the active CBD-like compounds. So that full spectrum is kind of the first category of hemp products. The second one is called broad spectrum, and broad spectrum products contain all the good stuff that full spectrum does, but they leave out the THC. And what your lawyer would tell you is, well, you can't say there's no THC, but we call it non-traceable THC. So that means that it's below a threshold that the testing equipment can actually see. So we feel pretty confident that the THC levels in it be very, very minimal, aren't going to have any intoxicating effect. And then the third category of hemp products are called isolate-like products. And these are effectively a CBD or hemp-based compound that's just isolated to one. So it leaves out all those terpenes and flavonoids, and it contains one active compound like CBD, kind of the common one, or CBDA, or kind of any of these other active phytocannabinoids or plant-based cannabinoids that work with our body.
Well, one thing I find interesting is that each of those different kinds that you talk about actually have different values when used in terms of therapeutic. Like some are more effective as anti-inflammatory things that you might be using for discomfort. Some are more relaxing. There's definitely a lot of research on things like seizure activity. So how would someone find out which the best one for them might be?
I think that's a really challenging question to answer, but it does come back to some self-experimentation and self-administration, because these products aren't necessarily regulated by the FDA, being the hemp products, right? There is another class of pharmaceutical drugs that are FDA approved, but we're not talking about those today. We're talking about the hemp product that you can pick up at your local grocery store, or maybe even in the convenience store or gas station, depending on your state. And when we're testing out these products, there's just a few things that we need to understand. And one of the biggest aspects is something called bioavailability. And that term is super fancy and overcomplicated, but basically what it means is if you're taking a certain compound, how much of it is going to be active in your body or go into your bloodstream. And when we look at the CBD hemp products out there, we're starting to understand based on research that this class of what's called acidic cannabinoids, the ones with the A at the end of their short acronym, have much higher bioavailability when compared to some of the neutral compounds, our general CBD. So an example of this is the compound cannabidiolic acid. So CBDA, this compound is actually what's in the hemp plant. And it is somewhere between 4 and 15 times more bioavailable, depending on the route that we're taking it. So topically or ingesting it, that really depends. But we're finding that it's way more bioavailable when compared to that CBD molecule or cannabidiol. And I always think it's interesting and worth noting that CBD as a molecule isn't always in that hemp plant in any appreciable amount. It's truly that acidic class, that CBDA or that acid at the end of the name, that is making it that natural molecule found in the plant that has more bioavailability. So again, it turns back on the consumer right now to really understand what benefits may work for them. And a lot of it's self-exploration because we have this fancy system that cannabis works with called the endocannabinoid system. And really, it's a very complex system that we're just starting to unearth in research. It was only really discovered in the early 1990s. And what we're understanding is that everybody has a unique endocannabinoid system that works differently with these different molecules. So again, self-exploration and a low and slow approach, not jumping in with a really big dose or a really big serving size can be really important when we're trying to figure out what's going to work for us.
See, what you talked about there, think about that word, endocannabinoid. One thing that fascinates me about that is these are receptors put in us by whatever you believe in, nature, God, wherever you go to for that. But they are actually part of our natural system.
Yeah. How fascinating is that? And for this to be part of our body system and only discovered in the 90s is just mind-blowing to me. I think it's really exciting, and it shows that we're on this new path of both Western medicine and Eastern medicine in trying to understand how this body system works with everything from regulating our sleep and mood to our inflammation and maybe even our aging process.
And I know as part of the American Cannabis Nurses Association, we've actually had discussions about something that might be called endocannabinoid deficiency, which might lead into many things and health challenges that people experience.
Yeah, absolutely. So it's a fascinating new line of research that I think as a nurse is exciting when we talk about being able to help people upregulate that endocannabinoid system and help with some of these, quite frankly, diseases that are unexplainable by Western medicine.
So give us an example.
I commonly think of like the fibromyalgia population. We're even seeing some of those anti-inflammatory pathways with the body being helped by both cannabis, but also upregulating the endocannabinoid system through breathing or yoga or even sunlight therapy. So it's just way bigger than we thought it was. It's not just a cannabis specific thing. It's a quality of life thing.
Now, I know one of your focuses is in terms of looking at the effects on athletic recovery. What is that about?
Yeah. So when we talk about people that are putting their body to work and they're doing repetitive motions like running or swimming, or maybe even lifting weights, we know that the body is stressed out. And that stress can be good because that stress, for instance, might help us grow muscles. But it really comes back to the body's inflammatory response to that stress. And so what we've done is we've dived deep into how athletes can recover by using cannabis, specifically hemp products that are not intoxicating, to aid in that recovery. And that recovery may come from the sleep route, or it may come from an anti-inflammatory approach. So thinking about the paradigm shift away from our traditional NSAIDs or your anti-inflammatory medications over the counter to how can we make a plant or a botanical herbal ingredient do some of the heavy lifting for us, but also help balance the other aspects within our body.
And there's so much to know, and it's growing every day. So if people who, of course, they are just grabbing various cannabis or CBD or all kinds of products under that realm off the shelves at an alarmingly fast rate, as well as the internet, there are certainly red flags that I'm sure, you would say would be good for people to know about.
Absolutely. There are some really big red flags when you go to the grocery store or even purchasing online. The number one is what's called a certificate of analysis. And if there's no easily accessible certificate of analysis, this is a red flag. And let me tell you why. That certificate of analysis comes from a third-party lab about 99% of the time, and it shows what's inside that product. It will show you what active compounds are there from cannabinoids and terpenes, but it will also show you if there's any residual pesticides or solvents that were used in the extraction process present in the product. And we need to be transparent about that and understand what we're ingesting, specifically because this is a supplement coming from a plant, and it may not always be consistent batch to batch. So that certificate of analysis is like the biggest red flag. Run the other way. Normally, it's an easily scannable QR code on the packaging or the label. Sometimes it's accessible online only, but just check the product when you're picking it up. The next big red flag is if a company or a product is making a claim. So if it's saying it can cure COVID or if it can cure cancer, I say just run the other way. There is certainly mounting research that cannabinoids may play a role in these disease processes, but likely that's not what this consumer product that you're buying at your grocery store is going to help with. And it's also has to do with regulations and the Federal Trade Commission and the FDA and all these regulating bodies. So I always like to say, if they're making a claim online, run the other way. I would say those are the two biggest red flags, though there's a laundry list of them. I would look at those two things if I were going to go pick up a hemp product off of the shelf.
That's really good because it's true. If the company is willing to ignore regulatory concerns, whether or not you agree with them, they're there. And if you are seriously selling any product in the natural product space, if you're a high-level manufacturer and business, then you're going to want to follow those labeling laws. And if you're not even following the labeling laws, then, are you following the production laws, which get, more in terms of the quality of what you're putting out?
Hands down. And I think those lead us into some of the red or the green flags for a consumer, right? If a company is able to follow those regulations and they have what's called CGMP or they follow good manufacturing practices, that's a huge red flag. And that's going to be on the label. You can tell a lot from picking up the label, no different than our food, right? Though maybe a little bit less transparent in our food industry than in the cannabis space. We can go, we can look, and we can investigate. Can I go see that certificate of analysis? Are there weird claims on there? And do they have that GMP seal? all of these are really good green flags for a product. So okay, this was probably made in a safe environment as opposed to being made in someone's basement. And there are examples of that, unfortunately, in the hemp space because it is so unregulated. So we have folks that are able to purchase a bulk made lotion, mix in some CBD and repackage it. And that's what we really want to avoid. We want people to use safe products that are following these manufacturing practices that just show a minimal compliance and basically a mindset of safety. And those are the companies that I always say we should be supporting.
And I do want to say that you are the Chief Science Officer and Director of Consumer Products and Brands for a specific company. And is that called Nextraction or is that the Creva?
Yeah, so Nextraction is our parent company that works with extracting primarily acidic cannabinoids, so that more bioavailable compound from the hemp plant using water. So that's our parent company, and we've developed this awesome technology that produces a really safe ingredient for hemp products. Meanwhile, we've also launched Creva, which is our in-house brand that focuses on athletic wellness. And Creva's products are bomb.com when it comes to the green flags. We've got our certificates of analysis, and we also believe in education because as a consumer, you should be able to go to a website and decide, is this the product that I want to ingest? So we really want to empower people on that front. And those are a lot of what I do on a daily basis.
Well, we're very lucky to have you. Also, congratulations. I know you just won as the president-elect of the American Cannabis Nurses Association.
Absolutely. Thank you. I'm so excited to get more involved with the ACNA. And Ellen, you're a esteemed member of our education committee, and we get a lot of work done. So I'm hoping to take a lot of those lessons learned from our education committee and the work that we've done over the last 2 years and translate that to an organizational level so we can make nurses at the forefront of cannabis education and we can grow it as a profession and also get the clout that we need to help bring cannabis mainstream to help others.
Well, thank you so much for being our guest today. People can find Nurse Nicole Foss and more about all that we talked about at creva.co. And of course, thank you for joining us.
Excellent. Thanks so much, Ellen. I really appreciate it.
Thank you, listeners, for tuning into Herbally Yours, produced in the studios of 90.3 WHPC, Nassau Community College, Garden City, New York. For further information, email us at whpc@ncc.edu. This is your host, Ellen Kamai at naturalnurse.com, inviting you to join us next week for another edition of Herbally Yours. Until then, stay healthy.